Hi, my name is Pedro Mora from Pacific.ca, and this afternoon we have Libby Davies from Vancouver East. She was a successful city councilor for 15 years or so.
Oh,
and
10.
10?
10
Oh,
years.
I got from 82
Thank
to
you.
97. 97 is when you got elected as an MP.
82 to 93.
All right. Oh, 82 to 93, so 10 years as city councilor, that's very successful. And then now you have about 10, 11 years as an MP.
That's right.
And you are running in Vancouver East, and you want to tell us, or tell our viewers, why do you want to continue as an MP representing the NDP on East Vancouver?
Well, thank you very much, Pedro, and it's always a pleasure to come on your show. You do a lot of work in the community, so it's good to come and speak with people and let people know what the issues are. I'm Libby Davies, and yes, I'm running for re-election in Vancouver East with the NDP, and I've been very proud to represent our riding over the last few elections. Vancouver East is a very diverse community. We have a lot of people who live on low income. It includes the downtown east side, and so the issues that I fight on and that I go after the Conservatives are issues that are very important to our riding, like fighting for affordable housing. I'm very, very concerned about the housing crisis in terms of homelessness, but the fact that now more and more renters can't find places to live, or the rents are too high. I'm very angry that the federal government, the previous government, and this government have abandoned any responsibility for housing. So that's something that we fight very hard in Ottawa, and I want to continue to do. Certainly the environment is a very major issue. We had a great opportunity in this last parliament to take action on climate change. And in fact, a majority of Parliament did pass Jack Layton's climate change bill. And Mr. Harper has been refusing to move ahead on climate change. So I think that's a huge issue for people. I think also there's big questions about the Canada's role in the international community. People used to be very proud of Canada's peace building and peacekeeping role. Our involvement in the war in Afghanistan, the complicity that we have with George Bush's war on terror, I think is something that really, really concerns a lot of Canadians, and I'm very proud that the NDP has taken a very strong position about saying that we should not be in Afghanistan in a combat role. We should be aiding civilian reconstruction and supporting civil society. But I think Canada internationally, the Conservatives have taken us backwards. And, this election finally, I think, is about leadership. What kind of Prime Minister do we want? Do we want someone who's going to give more and more money to the big corporations, which is what Mr. Harper has done? Or do we want a government that will put the priorities of people first in terms of protecting jobs, increasing minimum wage, building housing, providing childcare? I mean, these are all basic things that people in my community want to see happen. They're things we can afford. We live in a very wealthy country. It's not a lack of fiscal capacity. So I hope people will engage in the election, and I'm certainly hoping that people will continue to support me as a strong advocate and someone who stands up for working people, for progressive issues, and is willing to take on this Conservative agenda and fight back.
All right, thank you very much,
Thank
Libby.
you.
Now, we also have with us Mr. Charles Boylan. Now, he's a host for an early morning show at Co-op Radio, and he's running for the Marxist-Leninist Party of Canada, and he's perpetually been running on this issue. And I wonder if he can tell us today why is he pursuing this position as a member of Parliament for Vancouver South. Charles?
Right, thanks, Pedro. As Libby said, you do good yeoman work for community TV in Vancouver, and people appreciate the fact that you're available here to talk to not just the so-called major candidates, but all the candidates who are running in the region. I would like to invite our listeners to listen to our radio show, by the way. It's on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. on People's Radio, Co-op Radio, 102.7 FM. So there's a good reason to run in the election right off the bat, to let people know about alternative radio, which we have. I run as a candidate, and the Marxist-Leninist Party is running candidates across Canada, Pedro, because the issue for us is fundamentally the issue of empowering the Canadian citizens to have some control over public policy and public direction. And quite frankly, the electoral system in Canada is archaic. It's a 19th century electoral system. It was designed to suit men of property. And since that time of the 19th century when men of property had the vote has been expanded to every Canadian. But empowerment that should go with the vote has not been expanded. Why do I say that? Because in Canadian electoral law, political parties that embrace about 1 to 1.5% of the total population of Canada literally pick every single human being who goes into the House of Commons and into every provincial legislature and the National Assembly in Quebec. So in other words, they pick the candidates, and the leaders of the party at the federal level have the power to exclude any candidate, and we know many instances where the parties put their so-called first choices in a riding without respect to the. So what we're calling for is no elections without the citizens having the power to select the candidates first. Secondly, the government should not finance parties, they should finance the process. And finally, what we're saying, to empower the people, we not only to modernize the electoral system, but we need to involve the people in committees of discussion about how to empower themselves. That's our main platform in this election.
Thank you, Charles. Now, you're talking of a perpetual kind of electoral system, computerized, because we have the technology, I presume, and we have our nowpolling.ca, which is a pilot project on giving people the right to go and put their ideas on certain topics. One of those topics is NATO. On federal, if you go to nowpolling.ca, you go to federal polls, and on federal polls you go to military, and from military you go to the next step, which says affiliation with NATO and NORAD. And we're going to start with you, Libby, if it's okay, and can you tell us what your position is, or your party's position, in regards to NATO?
Well, first of all, NATO comes out of the Cold War, and it comes out of a security philosophy that's based on militarism. So I think it's very archaic. I'm glad you raised it, because I don't think there's a lot of debate about our military alliances. There was a little bit more about NORAD, and you mentioned that, and Canada's was being drawn into the whole so-called Star Wars defense. So I think for me and for the NDP, we think that these institutions are very outdated, that we should be focusing a lot more on human security. Security doesn't come through the barrel of a gun. There are issues around Canadian sovereignty, around the Arctic, and there are, things that need to be done there. But I think Canada's deep integration into these military alliances that draws us into military conflicts are things that I think require a thorough review and modernization, and I think Canada should be leading.
What do you mean by review and modernization?
Well, we should be looking at
modernization of equipment, or
a modernization of the approach that we take to how we deal with international questions,
okay,
and
so
how we deal with
NATO.
conflict.
The question is specifically about NATO. So are you saying that you would continue your affiliation with NATO, or would you cancel it, or you would think about it? What is your specific answer on NATO?
Well, that's what I was trying to tell you, is that what we want to see is a review of our participation in NATO, because we think that there should be alliances between nations based on international law, based on cooperation at the United Nations, and they should emphasize human security and conflict resolution, not an emphasis on militarism, because I think we can see that militarism is not. Are we better off with these wars and conflicts? No, we're not. They haven't solved anything.
Okay, so you would like to review it. Is that
yes.
the final answer? Now, let's hear the same question to Charles Boylan. What do you think we should do about NATO?
NATO, let's cut to the quick. NATO is a war pact. NATO is the major military instrument of the United States of America to push its empire-building project across the world. And if you look at the most recent history of NATO, NATO dragged us into bombing of Serbia and Yugoslavia in 1999. And I was at a demonstration as well as Marxist-Leninists right across the country opposing Canada's participation in the bombing of Serbia and Yugoslavia in 1999. We denounced that as an aggressive act of militarism by NATO. Canada was dragged into by NATO. Secondly, in October 2001, Canada was dragged into a war in Afghanistan. As far as I know, all the parties in the Parliament of Canada supported that. I may be wrong about that, and Libby can correct me if the NDP did oppose it, and that would be very good if they did. But the fact is, it's NATO's existence and Canada's participation in NATO that makes it subject to the decisions of NATO, which is controlled by the United States. So get Canada out of NATO. We want an anti-war government. In the modern times, Pedro, it's very important to be able to elaborate this point. The cornerstone of foreign policy, as Libby said, should be international law. It should be peaceful relations among states. No problem has been resolved by warfare. And so we want a government that is totally committed against the use of war in foreign policy, and that means getting Canada out of NATO. Yes?
We hear you saying that we should break relations with NATO, we should get out of NATO.
Correct.
That is very clear. Does Libby have some counter-argument to Charles'
No, I
idea
think
that
Charles stated his position very well, and I think they're very similar. I mean, we both agree that, these military alliances are not producing any long-term human security, and so I think Canadians want to see a government that doesn't just kind of go along with this war on terror, that doesn't go along with these military alliances, and we should be creating our own future in terms of international relations and under the auspices of international law. So I think most Canadians would agree with that.
But Charles' position is that we should quit our alliance with NATO very categorically, whereas you're saying we should consider it, we should
I said we
review.
should review and change what.
So there is a difference between your position and Charles' position.
I use the language that I feel comfortable in.
Yeah.
You asked me for my opinion, I gave it to you.
That's right. Okay, that's fine.
Pedro, can I say a word on this? Yeah, very quickly.
10 seconds.
The fact is that none of these issues are getting debated in this election. And the fact is that a deal was made by two, pardon the expression, well-to-do white men behind closed doors in the Parliament of Canada, the leader of the Liberals, the leader of the Conservatives, to take the Afghanistan war right out of this election. So they agreed to extend the occupation of Afghanistan, which saw the death of 90 civilians just 2 weeks ago with U.S. bombing, 60 children and 15 men, 15 women. These dead people in Afghanistan, the young bodies being brought home from the Canadian Armed Forces, are directly responsible from NATO, the NATO occupation there. And we're not allowed to debate that. We have no control, we have no say in that in this election because the Liberals and the Conservatives closed the deal to keep the armed forces there to 2011. We're saying get the troops home now and end the war in Afghanistan and get an anti-war government.
Charles, the question was about NATO.
On that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So let's use this opportunity to debate it.
Yeah, we have been debating probably for a long time, and what the poll is asking is for specific answers to the question of NATO. And you have said that you want to reconsider it. Well, Charles is saying that he has already considered it.
Yeah, I gave you my answer.
Yes, we have your answer that you want to reconsider it.
Yeah.
All right, fine. Let's move on to another topic that is your choice from nowpolling.ca. Have you seen the topics? That
No,
we
I
have?
didn't see it.
You haven't seen the topics. Do you, Charles, have another topic that is also on the federal issues?
One of the topics is on the issue of recall and the issue of control of the parliamentarians. I know that you're very concerned about that. And generally mechanisms of empowerment of the citizenry in between election times, Pedro.
Okay.
And so if you like, I can just say a word about that. I think that if you had a system whereby the citizens selected the candidates, you see, the issue actually boils down to the fundamental question of who has power in Canada. Most Canadians think that royal prerogative is symbolical, that the Queen of England is just a symbolical figure. It's not true. Royal prerogative is a real and effective power in Canada, but it doesn't operate through the Queen or her Governor-General. It operates through the Prime Minister of Canada. So the Prime Minister has all the power of royal prerogative. For example, he passed a law calling for an election in October 2009. He changed his mind, said we're going to have one in October 2008. Where does he get the power from? He has the power of royal prerogative. Or, here's another thing. Libby voted for a resolution saying that U.S. refugees from the war machine could find refuge in Canada. They passed a resolution. The majority of parliamentarians voted for it, but Parliament didn't have the power. Harper had the power. Where does he get the power from? Royal prerogative. So this is very crucial, Pedro, because unless the citizens are sovereign, unless the citizenry of Canada has sovereign power written into a new constitution that will accommodate the national needs of the Indigenous peoples, that will accommodate the national aspirations of Quebec, that will accommodate all the rights of all Canadians, including, Pedro, the right to recall parliamentarians and the right to have initiative whereby citizens could initiate legislation. We're not going to go very far.
Let's let Libby have her opinion on recall, because Charles has mentioned in one of the topics from nowpolling.ca. He's concerned about is citizens having the right to recall MPs or any politicians.
Is the question only on recall, or can I speak about parliamentary?
I asked you if you had a topic, and you say you didn't, so we went to Charles.
No, but is it only on recall, or is it on, the whole issue of electoral reform?
Charles has mentioned that the idea of recall.
Okay.
So I just wanted to know what is your opinion on
what
recall.
the NDP is focused on is bringing in proportional representation. I would agree.
Representation allow me to recall you?
Could you let me finish my responses? You keep interrupting me.
Well, because we're talking about recall, and you're
that's why I
shifting it
asked
to
you.
something else. So I wanted to hear your answers from what Charles
I can only
is talking.
speak in the way that I feel okay, rather than you putting words in my mouth. So if you would give me an opportunity to reply to your questions, I'd really appreciate it.
The question is about recall. Can you talk about
No, the
recall?
question was about, he's mentioned a number of issues, including recall. So I'm telling you, what I'd like to say is that what we've emphasized in terms of changing the way our parliamentary democracy works is to focus on proportional representation. I don't know that the NDP overall has a position on recall. I personally have questions about it because I've seen how it's been used in the United States. It can be used by the right wing.
The idea of recall came here when Rita Johnson was the busy premier of British Columbia. And she put a referendum, and during the election, whether people wanted recall and referendum. 85% of the population in BC wanted recall.
Was it through a referendum?
It was
Yes,
a referendum during the
referendum,
election.
yeah.
When the issue of proportional representation came with the Greens, they couldn't get 10% of the population to support that idea.
In proportional representation, the seats that are given proportionally to the parties are then, those representatives are selected by the party. And that's exactly where we need to break the monopoly of control over the candidates, over the representatives. The pressure from the citizens is that we want representatives who will represent us, the citizens, and not the party machinery, not the party leader who has to come under heel to the party whip and so on and so forth. In other words, they want more direct representation, and STV is more anti-party control, if you will, than straightforward proportional representation. But in the final analysis, the representatives should be under the control of the electorate, including the electorate having the power to recall them.
Okay, thank you. Libby, we are almost out of time, and we have 1 minute for any thought that you might want to throw at the end as a final thought.
Well, I guess just because we have been talking about, electoral reform, I mean, I guess one thing that really bothers me is that, people feel very turned off politics. And I think somehow we got to get out there and talk to people about using their own political voice and their energy, because if we don't do that, then we are leaving it to the powerful elites who do control this country and will continue to control this country. So the idea that, whether you're the downtown east side or you're a tenant or whoever you are, that voting is something that you can, it's not the only thing, right? But it's a very important tool. So I just want to kind of end on that note, that we disenfranchise ourselves when we don't use our political power through voting.
Thank you, Libby. And final 1 minute, Charles.
Yes, well, first I would like to encourage all our viewers to go to mlpc.ca or cpcml.ca, and you can read our program there. You can find out about our candidates. The key issue for our party is the issue of empowerment. And if, as Libby says, you're turned off politics, please give a vote to a Marxist-Leninist candidate, because that's a statement that you want to empower yourself in politics and not have the power and control strictly in the hands of the big parties. Thanks very much.